The harsh sound of little Michael's cough echoed through the modest cabin, tearing Hannah Morgan's heart with each of her son's spasms. Sitting on the edge of the 6-year-old boy's bed, she applied cold compresses to his burning forehead, watching helplessly as the fever consumed his only reason for living. The 24-year-old widow had exhausted all possible resources in Willow Creek, a dusty hamlet in the Arizona Territory. The nearest doctor was in Phoenix, 3 days away, and the treatment would cost more money than she could earn from a full year of work in the small garden she kept at the back of her property. It was on a particularly difficult afternoon that Lucas Reed showed up at her door. Tall, with broad shoulders and piercing green eyes, he stood like a shadow against the setting desert sun. His cowboy hat sat low on his face, and a thin scar cut across his left cheek. Silent witness to a story Hannah didn't yet know. "Ms. Morgan?" His voice was deep and controlled. "I heard about your son in town. I have a proposition for you." Hannah clutched her apron with trembling fingers, wary of the stranger. In recent months, several men had tried to court her, interested more in her land than in her heart. But there was something different in this man's gaze, a mix of determination and, curiously, vulnerability. "What kind of proposal, Mr. Reed?" "A marriage of convenience." He got straight to the point, taking a sizable wad of bills out of his pocket. "I have enough money for your son's treatment in Phoenix. In return, I need a place to settle down, a wife in the eyes of the law, and I promise to be a good father to the boy." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. It was enough money not only for treatment, but to ensure comfort for months. Still, the proposal seemed too absurd. Why would a man I barely know make such an offer? Lucas adjusted his belt where a revolver worn from use rested. "We all have our reasons, Mrs. Morgan. Mine are mine, just as yours will be yours. But I guarantee you won't regret it." That same night, as she watched Michael struggle to breathe, Hannah made her decision. The next day, she and Lucas Reed were married before the Justice of the Peace, in a quick ceremony without guests. Sheriff Anderson, a shrewd man who had ruled the law in Willow Creek for more than a decade, watched the union with suspicious eyes from his office window. The first few weeks of marriage were an exercise in mutual adaptation. Lucas proved to be a quiet man, but surprisingly kind to Michael. He spent hours telling the boy stories, teaching him how to rope even from his bed, bringing him small gifts from the city. Hannah watched their interaction with a mixture of gratitude and growing curiosity about her mysterious husband. However, the apparent peace began to show cracks when wanted posters began to appear around the city. Sheriff Anderson stepped up patrols, and Hannah noticed how Lucas tensed every time riders approached the property. One particularly hot night, while preparing dinner, Hannah found a bag hidden under the loose floorboards. Inside, in addition to more money, was a crumpled and blood-stained badge. His heart froze when he recognized the engraved name: Federal Delegate, Colorado Territory. The sound of boots on the porch made her quickly put away the evidence. Lucas entered, carrying wood for the stove. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Hannah saw something different in those green eyes. Not the criminal she was beginning to suspect him to be, but a man carrying a greater weight than he appeared. "How is Michael today?" he asked, his soft voice contrasting with the tension in his shoulders. "Better," Hannah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "The medicine you brought is working." Lucas approached the stove, getting dangerously close. The heat of his body and the smell of leather and horses filled Hannah's senses. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "Should it have?" She held his gaze, torn between fear and an attraction that grew every day. Before he could respond, horses' hooves sounded on the road. Lucas backed away quickly, his hand instinctively going to the gun. Hannah ran to the window and saw 3 horsemen approaching, led by Sheriff Anderson. "Lucas Reed!" The sheriff's voice thundered through the night air. "We know you're in there. Come out with your hands where we can see." Hannah looked at her husband, who stood as still as a statue. In the next room, Michael started coughing again. The seconds dragged by like hours, as Lucas seemed to be fighting an internal battle. "Hannah," he finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion, "there are things about me you need to know, but right now, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She looked at Michael's bedroom door, at the men outside, and finally at the man who in just a few weeks had become so much more than a convenience arrangement. In a moment of clarity, Hannah realized that her answer would define not only Lucas's fate, but the future of their little family. The sun set over the horizon of Willow Creek, painting the sky blood red, as Hannah Morgan Reed made the decision that would forever change their lives. Night had fallen over the small farm, and Sheriff Anderson's siege seemed to tighten like a noose around Lucas Reed's neck. Hannah stood by her husband's side, her heart torn between newfound loyalty and fear of the unknown he represented. "Last chance, Reed." The sheriff's voice cut through the tense silence. "Don't force my hand." Lucas moved with the agility of a predator toward the back window, staying in the shadows. "Hannah, I need you to distract them. I'm going to go around the garden and—" He stopped when he saw the expression on her face. "No," Hannah said with surprising firmness. "I'm not going to let you run away like that. Michael needs you." She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "We need you." The look Lucas gave her was full of mixed emotions. For a moment, Hannah glimpsed the man behind the outlaw's mask, someone who bore scars deeper than the one on his face. "Mrs. Reed," the sheriff called. "We know it's in there. Open the door." Hannah took a deep breath, straightened her dress, and walked to the front door. Before opening it, he glanced at Lucas, who had strategically positioned himself out of sight, but close enough to hear. "Sheriff Anderson," she greeted, holding the door only partially open. "What brings you and your men to my property at this hour?" The sheriff, a middle-aged man with eyes sharpened by years of experience, studied her closely. "Ms. Reed, we have information that your husband is not who he says he is. We need to speak to him." "Lucas is in the barn taking care of the horses," Hannah lied, surprising herself with the naturalness in her voice. "I can call you if you want." Anderson gestured for his deputies to surround the barn. "Ms. Reed, how long did you know Lucas before the wedding?" "Long enough to know he's a good man," she replied, thinking about how dedicated Lucas had been to Michael over the past few weeks. The sheriff removed his hat, revealing genuine concern on his face. "Hannah, your husband may be Lucas Carter, a man wanted for murder in Colorado. 3 federal marshals were killed 6 months ago." Hannah's blood ran cold as she remembered the tarnished badge she had found. But something didn't add up. The man who spent hours reading to his sick son couldn't be a cold-blooded killer. At that moment, Michael began coughing violently. Hannah turned inside, torn between her son and the situation at the door. "Go take care of the boy," Anderson said, softening his tone. "But we'll be back to talk more, Mrs. Reed." As Hannah ran to Michael's room, she heard the men heading towards the barn. He found Lucas already at his son's bedside, applying the syrup that had done so much good for the boy. "They went to the barn," she whispered, noting how gently Lucas looked after Michael. "Lucas, I need to know the truth. What happened in Colorado?" He finished medicating the boy before responding, his calloused fingers gently stroking the child's hair. "I was a federal marshal," he began, his voice low and controlled. "I discovered a corruption scheme involving other delegates. They were accepting bribes from gangs, letting them loot indigenous settlements." Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, absorbing every word. Michael had fallen asleep, his breathing calmer now. "When I tried to report them, they set up an ambush. 3 of them died in the shooting, but not from my bullets. They had an informant among the bandits who turned against them. Still, I was guilty. Lucas clenched his fists. I fled because I couldn't prove my innocence when I was dead. The sound of hooves approaching the house again interrupted the confession. Hannah stood up quickly, her dress rustling in the silence. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, hurt. "Because the less you knew, the safer you would be," he replied, moving closer. "Hannah, I never wanted to involve you and Michael in this. But when I heard about a sick boy needing help—" He paused, swallowing hard. Maybe he was looking for redemption. The look they exchanged was filled with mutual understanding. Hannah realized that, in just a few weeks, this man had become much more than a convenience deal. He was someone for whom her heart was beginning to beat faster. "Sheriff!" The voice of one of the deputies sounded outside. "We found something in the barn." Lucas moved toward the window, but Hannah grabbed his arm. "No," she said with determination. "Let's face this together. If you're innocent, we need to prove it." "It's too dangerous," he argued, but his eyes betrayed the desire to believe there was another way out than escape. Hannah moved closer, feeling the heat emanating from him. "You gave us a chance at a better life. Now it's our turn to fight for you." The sound of boots on the porch announced the sheriff's return. Lucas looked at the sleeping Michael, at the woman who had become his wife out of necessity, but now defended him out of choice, and made his decision. "Okay," he agreed, straightening his shoulders, "but we need to be smart. I have hidden evidence that could prove my innocence, but it's somewhere else." Hannah nodded, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and hope. "Where?" Before Lucas could respond, a firm knock sounded on the door. The moment of truth had arrived, and the choices they made in the next few minutes would determine not only their future, but also whether justice would prevail over the lies that had forced an honorable man to become a fugitive. The sun had completely set now, plunging Willow Creek into the darkness of night, but for Hannah and Lucas, a new dawn of possibility was beginning to dawn, bringing with it both danger and hope. Hannah opened the door with shaking hands, revealing Sheriff Anderson and his 2 deputies. The light from the lamp they carried cast long shadows across their tense faces. Lucas remained a few steps behind her, his posture seemingly relaxed, but Hannah could feel the tension emanating from him like waves of desert heat. "We found this in the barn," Anderson said, holding out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a partially burned telegram, bearing the letterhead of the Colorado Federal Marshal's Office. Lucas Carter's name was clearly visible. "It's not what it looks like, Sheriff." Lucas stepped forward, his boots squeaking on the wooden floor. "I can explain. 3 dead delegates, Reed, or should I say Carter?" Anderson kept his hand close to his holster. "I thought there was something familiar about you from day one. Now I know why." Hannah watched the scene with her heart pounding, torn between fear and the need to protect her little family. Michael slept in the next room, oblivious to the drama unfolding in his home. "Sheriff," she interjected, "please let him explain. There's more to this story than we know." Anderson hesitated, his experienced eyes studying the couple. "Mrs. Reed, stay away from him. You don't know what this man is capable of." "I know exactly what he's capable of," Hannah replied firmly. "He's capable of taking care of a sick boy who isn't even his son. He's capable of working from dawn to dusk to support a family he barely knew." Lucas gently touched Hannah's shoulder, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the sheriff. "Anderson, those deputies were involved in a corruption scheme. I have proof." "Where is this evidence?" the sheriff questioned, his tone still suspicious, but with a note of curiosity. "In a safe place, half a day's ride from here," Lucas replied. "In an old abandoned church near Snake Creek. Documents, payment records, even compromising photographs." One of the deputies, the youngest, moved uneasily. Hannah noticed how his hand shook slightly as he held the rifle. Lucas noticed it too, his green eyes narrowing slightly. "Deputy Miller," Lucas called softly. "You seem nervous. Did you know the men from Colorado?" The young man visibly paled, taking a step back. Anderson turned sharply to his subordinate, years of experience alerting him that something was wrong. "Miller?" the sheriff questioned. "He's lying!" Miller suddenly drew his gun, but Lucas was faster. In one fluid movement, he pushed Hannah behind him and disarmed the deputy with a precise kick. Chaos ensued in the small room. Anderson drew his gun, but kept it low, torn between his sheriff's instincts and the doubts that were beginning to emerge. The other deputy kept his rifle trained on Lucas, while Miller writhed on the ground, holding his injured wrist. "My brother," Miller began, his voice breaking. "My brother was among those delegates in Colorado. He was writing to me about a big deal that would change our lives." Hannah watched the scene unfold, her mind working quickly. "Is that why you came to Willow Creek? To find Lucas?" Miller nodded, angry tears streaming down his young face. "I came following clues. When the posters arrived, I was sure. Your brother was up to his neck in it, Miller." Lucas spoke with a mixture of compassion and firmness. "They were stealing indigenous lands, selling protection to bandits. I tried to resolve it internally, but—" "Lie?" Miller tried to get up, but Anderson held him back with a gesture. "Sheriff," Hannah stepped forward, "let Lucas get the evidence. If he's lying, he'll have his answer. If he's telling the truth—" A coughing fit from the bedroom interrupted his speech. Michael had woken up. Hannah rushed to answer him, leaving the men in a tense standoff in the room. "Mommy?" Michael's weak voice called. "What is happening?" Hannah sat next to her son, stroking his sweaty hair. "It's okay, honey. Lucas is talking to the sheriff." "Will Lucas tell me a story today?" the boy asked, his eyes shining with fever and hope. The innocent question seemed to pass through the walls, reaching the ears of the men in the room. Hannah saw something change on Sheriff Anderson's face. "Reed, or Carter," Anderson spoke after a long moment. "You have until dawn to bring this evidence. I'll leave 2 men guarding the property. If you try to escape—" "I'm not running away," Lucas interrupted. "Not anymore. I have too much to lose now." His gaze met Hannah's, who had returned to the bedroom door. Anderson handcuffed Miller and ordered the other deputy to take him to the city jail. "I will investigate Deputy Miller's connections to Colorado. In the meantime, you have your chance to prove your innocence." When the men left, leaving only one deputy standing guard outside, Hannah and Lucas finally took a breath. The silence of the night was broken only by Michael's irregular breathing. "I need to leave now," Lucas said, checking his weapons. "The sooner you bring the evidence—" Hannah grabbed his arm. "Promise you'll come back." Lucas pulled her close, his body solid against hers, and for the first time since they met, their lips met in a desperate kiss full of unspoken promises. "I'll be back before the sun comes up," he whispered against her lips. "Take care of our boy." Hannah watched through the window as Lucas mounted his horse and disappeared into the darkness. The night would be long, and she knew that the next few hours would determine not only her husband's fate, but the future she barely dared to dream for her family. The lamp remained lit throughout the morning, a guiding light for the man who had become much more than a convenience agreement. It had become his hope for happiness. Night embraced Willow Creek in its dark cloak as Lucas Reed galloped toward Snake Creek. The rhythm of his horse's hooves against the arid ground echoed like a distant drum, marking his race against time. The stars above shone with cruel clarity, silent witnesses to their desperate journey. His thoughts kept returning to Hannah and Michael, left behind under the deputy's watch. The kiss they exchanged still burned on their lips, an unspoken promise of return. For the first time in months, Lucas allowed himself to consider a future, not as a fugitive, but as the man Hannah was beginning to see in him. After 2 hours of intense riding, he saw the ruins of the old church, its irregular silhouette silhouetted against the night sky. The site had been abandoned years earlier when gold fever drove the congregation west. Now it served only as an occasional shelter for travelers and, more importantly, as a hiding place for the evidence that could clear his name. Lucas dismounted cautiously, his instincts honed by months of flight, alerting him to any suspicious movement. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional hooting of a distant owl. He led his horse behind the church, where the shadows were thickest. As he approached the entrance, he noticed something wrong. The door, which he had carefully locked on his last visit, was ajar. Lucas drew his revolver, moving like a predator in the shadows. The interior of the church was plunged in darkness, but his eyes, already adapted to the night, made out the familiar shapes of the broken pews and the abandoned altar. "I knew you'd be back, Carter." A familiar voice emerged from the shadows, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Lucas froze, immediately recognizing the voice. "Hawkins!" The name fell like a curse from his lips. "I thought he was dead in the Colorado shooting." A bitter laugh echoed through the empty church. "I almost died, thanks to you, but I survived long enough to follow your trail here." James Hawkins, former federal delegate and one of the main architects of the corruption scheme, emerged from the darkness. A deep scar marked his face where a bullet had hit him months earlier. "Where are the documents, Carter?" Hawkins demanded, his gun pointed firmly at Lucas's chest. "Why do you care? The others are dead. The scheme is over." "He finished?" Hawkins laughed again, a sound devoid of humor. "Do you really think it was just those three? The scheme is bigger than you realize, Carter. There are judges, politicians, powerful men involved, and they pay well to keep their secrets." Lucas noticed movement in the shadows. 2 more men emerged, their weapons also aimed at him. His finger brushed the trigger of his revolver, calculating his chances. "Think carefully," warned Hawkins. "You have a new life now, don't you? A pretty wife, a sick boy. It would be a shame if something happened to them." The mention of Hannah and Michael made Lucas's blood boil. "If you touch them, then give me the documents, and we all live. I can even make the charges against you disappear. After all, who's going to believe a fugitive murderer against the word of respectable law enforcement officials?" Lucas felt the weight of the choice on his shoulders. The evidence was hidden under a loose slab near the altar. Documents, photographs, and records that revealed years of corruption and crimes against indigenous communities. Handing over everything would mean letting the real criminals go unpunished, but fighting back could cost not only his life, but also the safety of his new family. "The sun's coming up, Carter," Hawkins pressed. "Soon that sheriff will realize you haven't returned. What do you think will happen to his dear wife when they find out she harbored a murderer?" At that moment, Lucas thought about Hannah, her strength in facing the sheriff, her determination to protect him even after discovering his past. He thought of Michael, the boy who looked at him with admiration during his nightly stories. They deserved more than a life of escapes and lies. "You're right about one thing, Hawkins," Lucas drawled, his hand still on the revolver. "I have too much to lose right now. That's why I can't let you win." What happened next was quick as lightning. Lucas threw himself behind a church pew as the shots began to echo through the sacred space. The deafening sound of weapons mixed with the splintering of ancient wood and the screams of men. In the chaos of the shootout, Lucas managed to hit one of the henchmen in the shoulder, knocking him down. The second man, while trying to get a better shooting angle, tripped over the wreckage, giving Lucas the opening he needed. 2 more accurate shots, and only Hawkins remained standing. "It's over, Hawkins," Lucas declared, emerging from his cover with gun drawn. "Let's do it the right way this time." The corrupt ex-delegate looked at his fallen men, then at Lucas, a crooked smile distorting his scar. "Not yet, Carter." With a sudden movement, he shot at the roof of the church. Rotten wooden beams began to collapse, forcing Lucas to throw himself to the side. When the dust settled, Hawkins had disappeared through the back door. Lucas ran to the evidence hiding place, his heart hammering in his chest. The documents were still there, intact. The sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon when Lucas remounted, the precious documents safely in his bag. Hawkins had escaped, but now Lucas had something more important than revenge. He had a chance to clear his name and protect his family. He spurred his horse, knowing that every second was crucial. Hannah and Michael were waiting for him, and for the first time since he began his escape, Lucas Reed rode not to escape his past, but toward his future. The sun was rising over Willow Creek, its first golden lights promising a new day, and with it, the possibility of redemption. The sun was beginning to turn the horizon gold when Hannah heard the first horse hooves approaching the farm. She hadn't slept, alternating between caring for Michael and watching the window, waiting for Lucas to return. The deputy standing guard outside also became alert, his tense silhouette visible through the muslin curtain. "Mommy?" Michael called from the bedroom, his voice stronger after a night's rest. "Luke is back?" "Not yet, dear," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm as her heart raced as she recognized not one, but several approaching knights. Sheriff Anderson led a small group, including 2 of his men and, to Hannah's surprise, young Deputy Miller, still in handcuffs. The grave expression on the sheriff's face made his stomach drop. "Ms. Reed." Anderson dismounted, adjusting his hat. "Still no news about your husband?" Hannah squared her shoulders, meeting the sheriff's gaze. "He'll be back. Lucas is a man of his word." "As was my brother," Miller interrupted bitterly, being quickly silenced by one of the deputies. Anderson sighed, his eyes revealing a mixture of compassion and determination. "Miller confessed some interesting things during the night. It appears your husband's story about corruption in Colorado may have some substance." Hannah's heart leapt with hope, but before she could respond, more hoofbeats cut through the morning air. Everyone turned to see a lone horseman emerging from the morning mist, riding as if the devil himself was chasing him. "Luke!" Hannah took a step forward, but Anderson stopped her with a gesture. When Lucas Reed approached, Hannah immediately knew something was wrong. His clothes were dirty and torn, and a dark stain was spreading on his left side. "Hawkins," he managed to say as he dismounted, almost falling if it weren't for the sheriff's quickness in catching him. "He's alive, and he's coming." Hannah ran to help Lucas enter the house, while Anderson ordered his men to establish a defensive perimeter. The sound of movement completely woke Michael up, and he tried to get out of bed. "Stay down, champ," Lucas told the boy as Hannah helped him sit in a chair. "We have quite a story to tell. But first—" He withdrew a sheaf of documents from his leather bag, handing them to the sheriff. "Here's everything. Payment records, names of corrupt officials, even photographs of gang encounters. Hawkins tried to stop me from bringing them in." Anderson quickly scanned the papers, his face hardening with each page he turned. Miller, still handcuffed, blanched as he recognized his brother's handwriting on some of the documents. That's impossible," muttered the young deputy. "My brother wouldn't be able to—" "Your brother was part of something bigger than all of us," Lucas explained, wincing as Hannah began to clean his wound. "A web of corruption that stretches from Colorado to here. Hawkins survived the shooting, and now he and his men are coming to destroy that evidence, and anyone who knows the truth." As if to confirm his words, a shot echoed outside, shattering one of the windows. Hannah instinctively threw herself at Michael, shielding him with her body, while Lucas and Anderson moved into defensive positions. "How many are there?" Anderson asked, reloading his gun. "Hawkins and at least 6 men," Lucas replied, his voice tight with pain. They're professional killers, Sheriff. They won't stop until they get what they want. Hannah looked at her husband, seeing no longer the mystery he once represented, but a man willing to die for the truth. And for his family. Michael needs to get out of here, she said, her mind working quickly. The back passage, Lucas suggested, exchanging a meaningful look with Hannah. The one that leads to the creek, if they can get there. Anderson nodded, understanding the plan. Miller, you go with Mrs. Reed and the boy. Consider this your chance at redemption. The young deputy, now free from handcuffs, looked at the documents implicating his brother and nodded solemnly. I will protect them with my life. More shots pierced the air, and threatening voices began demanding documents. Hannah quickly gathered some essential supplies and Michael's medicine, her heart torn between the need to protect her son and the desire to be by Lucas's side. Go, Lucas said softly, pulling her into a quick, intense kiss. Keep our boy safe. I promise I'll get back to you. You always keep your promises, Hannah replied, unshed tears shining in her eyes. Michael, still weak but determined, hugged Lucas tightly. Come back soon and tell the end of the story, Dad. The word father caught Lucas by surprise, and for a moment his hard mask broke, revealing all the emotion he felt for that little family that destiny had gifted him. While Hannah and Michael escaped through the back of the house with Miller, Lucas and Anderson prepared to confront Hawkins and his men. The sun now shone fully over Willow Creek, illuminating what would be one of the most decisive mornings in the small town's history. Are you ready to clear your name, once and for all, Reed? Anderson asked, positioning himself strategically. Lucas checked his revolver, thinking about Hannah and Michael, about second chances and promises of a better future. More than ready, Sheriff. It's time to bring justice to the West. The sound of approaching boots announced that the final battle was about to begin, and with it, the fate of a man who found redemption in the love of a brave woman and a boy who called him father. The shooting began with the violence of a desert storm. Bullets whizzed through the walls of the small farm as Lucas and Sheriff Anderson barricaded themselves in strategic positions. Outside, Hawkins's hoarse voice cut through the morning air. Time for playing games is over, Carter. Hand over the papers and maybe I'll let your precious family live. Lucas exchanged a meaningful look with Anderson as he reloaded his revolver. The wound in his side throbbed. But the pain was secondary compared to his concern for Hannah and Michael, who were now fleeing through the back passage with Miller. Hawkins is bluffing, muttered Lucas, peering through the broken window. He can't leave witnesses alive no matter what we do. Anderson nodded grimly. I counted 6 men besides him. They're dividing up to surround the house. A new shot went through the wood next to Lucas's head, ripping shrapnel from the wall. He responded with 2 accurate shots, being rewarded by a cry of pain from one of the attackers. 5, Lucas corrected with a tight smile. On the other side of the property, Hannah led Michael down the narrow path that led to the creek, with Miller bringing up the rear. The sound of gunshots echoed behind them, making your heart sink with each shot. Michael, still weak from his illness, struggled to keep up. "Mommy?" the boy gasped. "What if Daddy needs help?" The word Daddy made Hannah swallow hard. Within weeks, Lucas had become more than a husband of convenience. He was the father Michael never had, the man who risked everything to protect them. "Your father is strong," she replied, helping her son over a rock, "and the sheriff is with him." Miller, who was following close behind, suddenly stopped. "Mrs. Reed, I hear horses approaching." Back at the farm, the battle intensified. Lucas and Anderson had managed to kill 2 more of Hawkins' men, but their ammunition was running low. The sun was now high in the sky, its relentless heat turning the house into an oven. "We need to get this over with soon," Anderson said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Hawkins must have more men on the way." As if to confirm his words, the sound of approaching horses reached his ears. Lucas felt his blood run cold. Hawkins' reinforcements had arrived ahead of schedule. "Anderson," Lucas spoke quickly, "if something happens to me, promise me you'll protect Hannah and Michael. The documents prove my innocence, but they're going to need someone to—" "Stop it, Reed," interrupted the sheriff. "Nobody's going to die today, except maybe those bastards out there." A further coordinated attack by Hawkins' men forced them to duck. Bullets ripped through the walls of the house like a deadly rain, destroying furniture and memories. Lucas grabbed a portrait of Hannah and Michael that he kept in his pocket, the photograph now stained with his own blood. On the creek trail, Hannah, Michael, and Miller hid behind some rocks when they heard the riders approaching. To his surprise, they were not Hawkins's men, but rather two federal deputies that Anderson had summoned the night before. "Ms. Reed," called one of them, identifying himself as Agent Parker, "the sheriff sent us. We'll escort you into town." Miller kept his gun ready until he was sure of the identity of the newcomers. When he was convinced, he turned to Hannah. "Go with them," he said, determined. "I need to get back. I owe it to the sheriff. And your husband." Hannah hesitated for just a moment before nodding. "Take care of them," he urged, knowing that Miller was seeking his own redemption. The young deputy set off back to the farm, while Hannah and Michael followed with the federal agents. The boy looked back one last time, in the direction where the shots were still echoing. "He's going to come back to us, isn't he, Mommy?" Hannah squeezed her son's hand. "Yes, you will, darling. Your father always keeps his promises." At the farm, Miller's arrival momentarily changed the balance of the battle. Taking advantage of the distraction, Lucas managed to hit Hawkins in the shoulder, forcing him to retreat. "You're surrounded, Hawkins," shouted Anderson. "Your men are falling, and federal reinforcements are on the way." "Then I'll take you with me." Hawkins' response was accompanied by a flaming object thrown through the window. "Oil!" Lucas shouted, jumping to put out the fire that was starting to spread. The moment of distraction was just what Hawkins needed. He charged the back door, determined to recover the documents or destroy them along with the house. Lucas intercepted him in the hallway, and the two men engaged in a brutal fight. Lucas's wound protested with every movement, but anger and determination kept him standing. "You destroyed my life once," Lucas growled, blocking a blow from Hawkins. "You won't do that again." Anderson and Miller tried to contain the last of Hawkins' men outside as the fire began to spread to the corners of the house. The smell of smoke filled the air, mixing with the odor of gunpowder and blood. At a decisive moment, Hawkins pulled out a knife, aiming for Lucas's chest. But years on the run had sharpened the former police chief's reflexes. Lucas dodged the blow and, with a precise movement, disarmed his opponent. "It's over, Hawkins," Lucas declared, holding the man still while Anderson and Miller rushed in. The sheriff handcuffed Hawkins while Miller helped control the fire. Outside, the first rays of the morning sun illuminated the bodies of the fallen men, the bloody price of truth. "Are the documents safe?" Hawkins asked, his smirk stained with blood. "They're on their way to Phoenix," Anderson replied, "along with your confession about what really happened in Colorado." Lucas leaned against the wall, exhausted and bruised, but alive. His thoughts turned to Hannah and Michael, now safely on their way to the city. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to smile. Not the strained smile of a fugitive, but the hopeful smile of a man who could finally see his future clearly. "Come on," Anderson said, lifting Lucas carefully. "Your family is waiting." The house that had been the scene of so much love and violence now smoked in the morning sun. But Lucas knew that a home was not made of walls and roofs. Home was in Hannah's arms and Michael's smile, and it was there that he could finally return, no longer as a fugitive, but as a free man. The small sheriff's office in Willow Creek had never been busier. Federal agents came and went, examining the documents Lucas had recovered, while Hawkins and his surviving men occupied the cells in the back. Sheriff Anderson himself was at his desk, composing a long telegram to authorities in Phoenix. Hannah sat in a chair near the window, Michael asleep on her lap. The last 24 hours had been exhausting for everyone, especially for the boy, whose fever had finally broken thanks to the care of the town doctor. Lucas, with his wound properly treated and bandaged, could not take his eyes off his family. "The documents are conclusive," Agent Parker declared, closing a thick folder. "We have names, dates, amounts, everything we need to dismantle the entire network of corruption. Delegate Carter, or rather Reed, you have done the territory a great service." "I didn't do it alone," Lucas replied, his gaze meeting Miller's, who stood quietly in the corner of the room. The young deputy had proven his worth during the battle, choosing the side of justice, even if it meant tarnishing his brother's memory. Anderson finished his telegram and stood up, stretching his tired back. "Well, I think it's time for some important decisions. Reed, with your innocence proven, I imagine you want to get your badge back." A heavy silence fell over the room. Hannah looked up, her heart suddenly sinking. Being a federal marshal would mean constant travel, daily danger, exactly the kind of life she feared for her newly formed family. Lucas walked to the window, observing the city that, in such a short time, had become his home. "No," he finally replied. "I served the law for many years, Sheriff. Now I want to serve my family." The relief on Hannah's face was visible, and even the semi-conscious Michael seemed to smile in his sleep. Anderson nodded understandingly. "In that case," the sheriff continued, "I have another proposal. Willow Creek is growing, and I need a deputy I can trust, someone who knows the law, but also understands the value of a home." Lucas exchanged a meaningful look with Hannah, who subtly nodded. "It would be an honor, Sheriff." "Excellent," Anderson clapped once. "Miller, as for you—" "Sir," the young man interrupted, stepping forward, "if I may, I would like to continue serving at Willow Creek. I have learned more about integrity in the last 24 hours than I have in my entire life." The sheriff smiled. 2 new deputies in one day. This city is getting dangerously respectable. The following hours were dedicated to finalizing reports and organizing prisoner transport. Hawkins would be flown to Phoenix the next morning, along with the evidence that would destroy the network of corruption he had helped build. When they were finally able to leave the sheriff's office, the sun was already setting over Willow Creek. Lucas, Hannah, and Michael walked slowly home, or what was left of it after the shooting. The main structure was still standing, but a lot of work would be needed to make it habitable again. "We can stay at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house until the house is ready," Hannah suggested, surveying the damage. She always had a special affection for Michael. Lucas hugged them both, ignoring the pain in his wound. "That won't be necessary. I bought that property on the outskirts of town a few weeks ago, before all that chaos started. I needed a place to hide the documents, but I also hoped that one day we could make it our home." Hannah looked at him in surprise. "The old Peterson farm? The one with the creek and the orchards?" "The same. It needs some repairs, but the soil is good for planting. There's enough pasture to raise cattle, and—" he smiled. "It has a perfect room for a boy who loves cowboy stories." Michael, who had recovered some of his energy, hugged Lucas's leg. "Are we going to have horses?" "All the ones you can ride, champ. After you're fully recovered, of course." Hannah felt happy tears forming in her eyes. Just a few weeks ago, she was a desperate widow, agreeing to marry a stranger to save her son. Now she had not just a husband, but a partner, a father for Michael, and the promise of a future she had never dared to dream of. "So," Lucas picked Michael up, ignoring his wound's protests, "what do you think about going and seeing our new home?" The path to the Peterson property was filled with plans and dreams. Michael wanted his own horse and a rope to learn how to rope. Hannah already envisioned a bigger garden than the last, maybe even some chickens. Lucas just smiled, taking in the simple happiness of having a family to call his own. When they arrived at the farm, the sun had completely set, but the full moon gave enough light for them to appreciate the beauty of the place. The main house was larger than his previous residence, with a spacious porch and windows that would allow the desert breeze to cool the rooms in the summer. "It's perfect," Hannah whispered, squeezing Lucas's hand. "Not yet," he replied, pulling her close. "But it will be." Michael had fallen asleep in his father's arms, exhausted but content. Lucas carried him inside, where makeshift mattresses awaited them, their first night as a real family, without secrets or threats hanging over their heads. Later, with Michael fast asleep, Lucas and Hannah sat on the porch watching the stars that dotted the Arizona sky. "You know," Lucas began, his voice soft in the night, "when I proposed that marriage arrangement, I never imagined I would find so much more than a hiding place." Hannah lay back against his chest, careful of his wound. "And I never imagined that an agreement of convenience could turn into true love." Lucas kissed the top of her head, silently thanking the fate that had led him to Willow Creek. There, in the Badlands of Arizona, a wanted former deputy had found not only redemption, but also the kind of love that makes a man want to be better. The night passed quietly over the new Reed estate, promising not just a new day, but a new beginning for a family that had found its way through the trials of fate. Dawn brought with it the sound of hammers and saws echoing across the Reed property. A week had passed since Hawkins' capture, and the old Peterson farm was beginning its transformation. Lucas, still recovering from his wound, supervised a group of men from the town who volunteered to help renovate the house, a gesture of gratitude for the role he had played in bringing justice to Willow Creek. Hannah watched from the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, as Michael, now stronger, followed Miller around. The young deputy had become a constant presence on the property, seeking redemption through honest work and the genuine friendship he was beginning to develop with his family. "The roof will be ready by the end of the week," Lucas reported, walking up the porch steps to join his wife. "Anderson said more volunteers will be coming tomorrow to help with the barn." Hannah smiled, handing him a cup of coffee. "The whole town seems determined to help us. Mrs. Wilson even promised to bring new curtains that she's sewing." "It's more than helpful," Lucas mused, watching Michael try to imitate Miller as he demonstrated how to use a lasso. "It's acceptance. Something I haven't felt since I left Colorado." The morning sun illuminated the surrounding fields, revealing the land's potential. Hannah had already started planning where the garden would be, bigger than the previous one, and Lucas was talking about buying a few heads of cattle as soon as the barn was ready. The life that had seemed impossible just weeks ago was now taking shape before his eyes. "Letter from Phoenix," Anderson announced, riding up to the estate with mail in hand, "and news about Hawkins." Lucas walked down the steps to greet the sheriff, his expression tensing slightly. Even though his innocence was proven, the shadows of the past still occasionally haunted him in nightmares. "Hawkins confessed everything," Anderson continued, breaking down. "With the documents we recovered and your testimony, authorities have already begun to dismantle the entire network of corruption. Several judges and politicians have been arrested in the last week." Hannah walked over, placing a comforting hand on her husband's arm. "So, it's really over?" "Almost," Anderson replied, handing the letter to Lucas. "This is from the governor of the territory. He wants his formal testimony in Phoenix, but it can wait until the house is ready." Lucas opened the letter, his green eyes quickly scanning the lines. A small smile appeared on his lips. "They also want to award me a medal for services to the territory." "Is Dad going to win a medal?" Michael had gotten closer without them noticing, his eyes shining with admiration. "Like a real hero?" "Your father was always a hero," Hannah said softly, exchanging a meaningful look with Lucas. I just needed the world to recognize that." Her words warmed Lucas's heart. It was incredible how, in such a short time, they had gone from an agreement of convenience to a true family, united by something much stronger than legal papers or desperate circumstances. The rest of the day passed between work on the house and preparations for the future. Miller helped Michael build a small wooden corral, promising that they would soon have a colt for him to train. Hannah, helped by some women from the city, organized the rooms as they were ready, transforming the old Peterson house into a real home. At night, after a simple dinner served on the porch, Lucas found Hannah alone in the future living room. She was standing by the window, watching the moon that bathed the property in its silvery light. "A penny for your thoughts," he said, approaching. Hannah turned around with a smile. "I was thinking about how life takes turns. When you showed up on my doorstep that day, offering a deal to save Michael, I thought I was making a deal with the devil." "And now?" Lucas asked, pulling her close. "Now I know I was making a pact with an angel in disguise," she replied, touching the scar on his face tenderly. "A little bruised angel, but still an angel." Lucas's laughter echoed through the empty room. "I don't know if I deserve that much credit. I was looking for redemption as much as you were looking for salvation. And we found them both, didn't we?" Hannah rested her head on his chest, listening to the pounding of his heart. "You found your redemption, and I found much more than salvation for Michael. I found love." From the makeshift bedroom upstairs came the sound of Michael's coughing. No longer the desperate coughing from before, but just a small reminder of what they had overcome together. "I should check to see if he's okay," Hannah said, but Lucas stopped her. "Let me go," he offered. "I promised to tell him a story about a brave sheriff and his young deputy who helped bring justice to a small town in Arizona Territory." Hannah smiled, watching him climb the stairs. Every day the bond between Lucas and Michael grew stronger, proving that family was not just a matter of blood, but of love and choices. Through the window the stars shone over Willow Creek, silent witnesses to how fate could weave surprising stories. An agreement born of desperation had blossomed into true love, and a house built on secrets now stood on a foundation of honesty and trust. Hannah closed her eyes, silently giving thanks for the second chance life had given them. Upstairs, I could hear Lucas's deep voice telling his story, interspersed with Michael's curious questions. This was how a home should be, filled with love, stories, and promises of a better tomorrow. The night passed quietly over the Reed estate, as a family built by destiny and strengthened by love continued to build not just a home, but a future together. Autumn has arrived at Willow Creek, bringing with it cooler winds and the promise of change. The former Peterson farm, now owned by the Reeds, had been completely transformed in the past 2 months. The new barn gleamed with its fresh red paint. The main house had white curtains on the windows, courtesy of Mrs. Wilson, and Hannah's vegetable garden was beginning to bear its first fruits. Lucas was adjusting his horse's saddle, preparing for the trip to Phoenix. The moment for his formal testimony had arrived, and although the prospect of facing his past did not please him, he knew it was necessary to definitively close that chapter of his life. "Are you sure you don't want me to go with you?" Hannah asked, approaching with a bundle of provisions for the journey. Her fingers brushed his as she handed him the package, sending that familiar rush of electricity through his body. "Someone needs to keep an eye on our little cowboy." Lucas smiled, indicating Michael, who was practicing with his new lasso in the corral. The boy had recovered completely, and his energy seemed inexhaustible. Also, Miller and Anderson promised to take turns checking to make sure everything's okay around here. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Miller emerged from the barn carrying a bale of hay. The young deputy had found his place in Willow Creek, respected by the community and considered part of the Reed family. His dedication to helping on the farm was his way of atoning for his guilt over his brother's past. "The horses are fed and the barn is secure," Miller reported, "and I promise to keep a special eye on the colt we set aside for Michael." The boy's face lit up when he heard about the colt, his early birthday present, hidden on a neighboring ranch until the time was right. Lucas and Hannah had decided he was strong enough to start learning to ride properly. "Daddy," Michael ran up to them, his bow trailing in the dust, "will you bring your medal for me to see?" Lucas knelt down to be at his son's level, ignoring the slight discomfort where his wound had healed. "I'll bring something better," he promised, ruffling the boy's hair. "I will bring true stories about how justice always catches up with those who do evil." Hannah watched the interaction between the two with her heart overflowing. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago they were strangers, united by a desperate agreement. Now the love between father and son was as natural as the sun rising over the Arizona plains. "Sheriff Anderson has arrived," Miller announced, spotting the dust kicked up by the officer's horse approaching the property. Anderson dismounted with the agility of someone much younger, his badge glinting in the morning sun. "Ready to go, Reed? Federal escort is waiting for us in town." Lucas nodded, turning to his family. Michael hugged him tightly, burying his face in his chest to hide the tears that threatened to fall. "Come back soon, Dad." "Before you know it, champ." Lucas hugged him back, memorizing the moment. "Take care of your mother for me." When he stood up to say goodbye to Hannah, the words seemed inadequate. Instead, he pulled her into a deep kiss, ignoring the other men's smiles. Hannah held on to him as if she could keep him there by the force of her will. 3 days, he whispered against her lips. "Promise me you'll be back in 3 days." "Not all the gold in the territory would keep me away any longer," Lucas promised, his voice hoarse with emotion. The sound of horses' hooves echoed through the property as Lucas and Anderson rode toward town. Hannah, Michael, and Miller remained at the farm's entrance until the figures disappeared over the horizon. Hours dragged on after Lucas left. Hannah busied herself with daily tasks, grateful for Miller's constant presence and the frequent visits from the town's women, who seemed to have developed a sixth sense for when she needed company. On the second night, while tucking Michael into bed, the boy asked a question that caught her by surprise. "Mommy, do you think Dad will come back different than Phoenix?" Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, carefully considering her response. "What do you mean, different? What if they want him to be federal delegate again? What if he has to leave?" The fear in his son's voice echoed his own secret worries. "Your father made a choice, Michael. He chose both of us. He chose this farm, this life. Nothing in Phoenix will change that. Promise?" "I promise." Hannah kissed his forehead. "Now sleep. The quicker you sleep, the quicker your father will be back." Later, sitting alone on the porch, Hannah allowed her own doubts to surface. What if the testimony brought more complications to light? What if other enemies from Lucas's past emerged? Life had a habit of testing the most sincere promises. Miller, making his nightly rounds, stopped when he saw her. "He'll come back," he said simply, as if reading her thoughts. "I've never seen a man look at a woman the way Lucas looks at you, nor a son the way he looks at Michael." Hannah smiled, grateful for the certainty in the young deputy's words. "Thank you, Miller, for everything." The stars shone over Willow Creek, the same stars Lucas would be seeing on his journey to Phoenix. Hannah closed her eyes, sending up a silent prayer that he would return safely, bringing with him not just a medal, but the knowledge that his past was finally sealed. On the morning of the third day, the sound of distant hooves made his heart skip a beat. It was too early to be Lucas, but she still ran to the farm entrance, Michael right behind her. Miller emerged from the barn, his hand instinctively going to his holster. The dust on the horizon announced the arrival of horsemen. Hannah shielded her eyes against the rising sun, her heart beating faster and faster as the figures approached. When he could finally make out the details, a smile lit up his face. Lucas rode ahead, the Arizona sun making his new medal gleam against his chest. But it wasn't the honor that captured Hannah's attention. It was the smile on his face, the look of a man who was finally at peace with his past and looking forward to his future. A future that began there, on that farm in Willow Creek, with the family that destiny had gifted to him through an agreement that turned into the purest love. Winter came to Willow Creek, bringing with it rare snow that covered the Arizona plains like a silent white blanket. 6 months had passed since Lucas's return from Phoenix, and the Reed farm was thriving under the family's dedicated care. On the porch of the main house, Hannah watched Michael riding his foal for the first time alone in the snow-covered corral. The boy had grown up strong and healthy, without any trace of the illness that had almost taken him. Lucas walked beside the horse, his patient instructions echoing in the cool morning air. "Keep the reins steady, but don't pull too hard," he instructed, his pride evident in his voice. "That's right, champ. You were born for this." Miller, who remained a constant presence on the farm even after his promotion to assistant sheriff, leaned on the corral fence. "He rides better than most cowboys I know," he commented, smiling as he saw Michael do a perfect turn. The sound of hooves on snow announced the arrival of Sheriff Anderson. Since the events with Hawkins, he had become a close friend of the family, often bringing town news and sharing Sunday dinners. "Good morning, Reed family," he greeted, dismounting nimbly. "I brought mail from Phoenix." Hannah felt a slight pang in her heart. Phoenix's letters always brought back memories of the turbulent past. But this time, Anderson's smile suggested good news. "The last of Hawkins' men has been captured at the Mexican border," he announced, handing the telegram to Lucas, who had approached. "The corruption network has been completely dismantled, and there's more. The governor wants you to be one of the speakers at the graduation ceremony for the new federal delegates next month." Lucas read the telegram in silence, his expression thoughtful. Hannah knew that look. It was the same one he had when something important needed to be decided. "What do you think?" he asked, handing her the paper. "It would be an opportunity to show the new delegates that true justice goes beyond the badge." Hannah smiled, remembering how her own judgment of Lucas had changed so drastically. "I think they need to hear your story. They need to understand that sometimes the path to justice is not a straight line." Michael got off his horse and ran towards them, his cheeks red from the cold. "Can we all go together? I want to see where Dad got his medal." Lucas lifted his son in his arms, laughing. "This time we're all going, as a family." News of the upcoming trip quickly spread throughout the city. Mistress Wilson insisted on making new dresses for Hannah, arguing that a hero's wife needed to present herself properly in the territory's capital. Father Johnson offered his prayers and blessings, reminding everyone how the Reed's story was a testimony to the power of redemption. The following weeks were filled with preparations. Hannah oversaw the organization of the farm, ensuring everything would be in order during her absence. Miller promised to take care of the property, with the help of other city residents who volunteered. The night before they left, after Michael had gone to bed, Lucas found Hannah on the porch, gazing at the stars that shone brightly in the clear winter sky. "A year ago, I was a nameless man, running away from a past that haunted me like a shadow," he reflected, hugging her from behind. "Now I have a name, a family, a place to call home." Hannah snuggled into his arms, feeling the warmth of his body against the cold of the night. "And to think it all started with a desperate deal, the most important deal of my life." Lucas kissed her neck softly. "You gave me so much more than a hiding place, Hannah. You gave me a reason to be a better man." The soft sound of footsteps in the snow made them turn. Michael was standing in the doorway, holding his favorite blanket. "I can't sleep," he admitted, his eyes shining with anticipation for the trip. Lucas extended his arm, bringing his son to them. There the three of them stayed, a family forged not by blood, but by love and the choices they had made. The trip to Phoenix was an adventure in itself. Michael, fascinated by the ever-changing landscape, bombarded his parents with questions about every city and every rock formation they saw. Hannah discovered that she loved traveling, especially now that she could do it without fear or urgency. The ceremony in the territory's capital was grand, with delegates and officials from across Arizona gathered to hear the story of the man who had chosen the truth above his own safety. When Lucas took the podium to speak, his medal shining in the desert sun, Hannah felt her heart swell with pride. "Justice is not just a word engraved on a badge," he began, his voice strong and clear. "It's a choice we make every day. Sometimes the hardest path is the only one that leads us to the truth." Her eyes met Hannah's in the audience, and a soft smile touched her lips. "But the real treasure isn't in medals or titles. It's in the love of a family that believes in you even when the world doubts. It's in the courage of a woman who bet everything on a stranger, and in the innocence of a boy who taught me the meaning of being a father." Michael, sitting next to his mother, sat up proudly at his father's words. Hannah held her small hand, remembering her sick son who was now brimming with life and joy. The return to Willow Creek was marked by a town celebration. The entire community gathered to welcome their heroes, transforming the central square into an impromptu festival. Miller organized a barbecue, Mrs. Wilson brought pies, and even old Sam, the saloon owner, contributed kegs of his best beer. Later, when the festivities were over and the Reed family returned to their farm, they found a surprise waiting for them. The residents had come together during his absence to build a new stable, larger and stronger than the previous one. "For the future horses," Miller explained, smiling as he saw the excitement in his friend's eyes. "After all, every legend of the West needs a good herd." That evening, as the snow gently fell again over Willow Creek, Lucas Reed sat on his porch with his family. Hannah rested her head on his shoulder, Michael slept peacefully on her lap, and the stars shone like diamonds in the dark sky. There, in that perfect moment, he understood that all the trials, all the running and fighting, had been necessary to get him exactly where he was supposed to be. It wasn't just a deal that had changed his life, it was the love, trust, and courage of two people who had seen beyond their scars. The snow continued to fall, covering the plains of Arizona with its white purity, just as love had covered the wounds of the past with the promise of a bright future. And on the Reed farm, a family built by destiny and strengthened by love continued their journey, no longer as strangers united by agreement, but as souls forever intertwined by the truest of feelings.